Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine the scene right after Paul wraps up his really intense time in Ephesus.
Yeah, that city was buzzing, right? Maybe still a little shaken from his ministry that, well, it truly turned things upside down.
Definitely. And then picture Paul having navigated all that, turning his gaze outward, towards his next ambitious destinations.
It's a powerful pivot point, isn't it? He's leaving behind this significant, thriving center he helped establish. But his focus is already firmly on the vast, unreached territories stretching further west.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're diving into today. We're exploring this really crucial period of Paul's life immediately after he leaves Ephesus.
Right. We're going to track his complex travels, the unexpected turns, including, imprisonments, and connect all of that to some of his most important writings from these later years, leading up, potentially, to his execution in Rome.
We're really going to look at how his overarching vision for ministry continued to propel him forward, even through immense challenges.
Seeing how his physical journey intertwines with the profound insights captured in his letters. It's fascinating stuff.
And our entire exploration, our sort of map for this deep dive, comes directly from the notes you've provided us.
Yeah, specifically section 4 of Movement Vision. That's our guide here.
Precisely. So our mission here is to distill the most important kind of nuggets of knowledge and insight from these notes.
Yeah, we want to truly understand the context of these later years, the backdrop against which these crucial letters were written, and really see how that driving vision sustained Paul through, everything.
So let's jump right in. Setting the stage right after he leaves Ephesus, the notes describe him leaving in the midst of uproar.
Yeah, which gives you a sense of the impact he had there, doesn't it?
It really emphasizes that his ministry wasn't just teaching, it was disruptive, in a good way, reshaping culture and belief systems.
Absolutely. And as he departs, his sights are immediately set on ambitious goals. The notes clearly point to Rome and then Spain.
Spain? Wow. That really feels like the edge of the known world for them at that time.
It kind of was. But he also had other pressing matters to attend to back east, didn't he?
Absolutely. There was a significant desire to return to Jerusalem.
And it wasn't just a quick visit. The source notes highlight that he wanted to go with gifts.
Right, the collection.
Specifically to reinforce the unity between Gentile and Jewish believers. This was clearly a non-negotiable priority for him amidst his, global aspirations.
And he also needed to check in on the churches he'd established in Greece.
Yes, and checking on Greece, particularly Corinth, proved, complicated.
To say the least. While he was busy in Ephesus, tensions had unfortunately fractured the Corinthian churches.
Right. He'd made a swift, difficult trip back there, which the notes say didn't go well, didn't really fix things.
So he shifted tactics, sending Titus with a letter instead.
Right. He dispatched Titus and then waited anxiously for news. Instead of sailing directly back towards Jerusalem as planned, he diverted, heading west but pausing at Troas, expecting to meet Titus there.
But Titus didn't show up.
No. And when Titus didn't arrive, it caused him significant distress, prompting him to cross over to Macedonia.
And it's in Macedonia that he finally finds Titus and, crucially, gets good news about Corinth.
Yes, the news was positive, thankfully. The notes mention he then hurriedly wrote what we now know as 6 Corinthians.
Often described as his most personal letter, right?
Oh,
very emotional.
Exactly, yeah. His most emotionally charged letter. But interestingly, despite the good news and the writing, he still delayed his overall journey toward Jerusalem.
So after all that navigating of plans and detours, he finally makes it to Corinth for the winter. And the notes describe him feeling invigorated there.
That sense of invigoration makes perfect sense. He's coming off the success in Ephesus, which had become a significant hub, and he's encouraged by the good reports from both Philippi and now finally Corinth. Things are looking up a bit.
What was the journey like to get him to Corinth for that winter stay? Did he just sail across?
Actually, no. The source notes paint a picture of him taking the less traveled paths, specifically mentioning the valleys through the mountains from Thessalonica towards Illyricum on the Adriatic coast.
Oh, interesting.
Eventually bringing him down to Corinth. So an overland route, it seems.
And he settles in there for about 3 months over the winter.
He did. And while the notes mention the warmth of hospitality he received, people like Gaius, the whole church community there, it's clear his mind wasn't solely focused on Corinth during this time. His heart was elsewhere, you could say.
Because he was deeply engrossed in writing a letter that had massive implications for his future plans.
Exactly. He was incredibly busy during those 3 months, dictated a monumental letter with his scribe Tertius, a letter addressed to the believers in Rome.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and the notes highlight this. Paul hadn't been to Rome.
Right.
He hadn't met most of the people he was writing to. He hadn't planted those churches himself. And yet, he's pouring his energy into this incredibly profound letter to them.
It was clearly a city and a goal that was very high on his list, his bucket list, as the notes put it.
It certainly was. The notes even give us this vivid image of the context of writing Romans, picturing him walking the windswept, rain-drenched shores of the Saronic Gulf outside Corinth, with snow-capped mountains visible in the distance.
Wow.
His mind already projected across the sea in Italy and, importantly, Spain.
And this letter, Romans, is described in the source material using pretty powerful terms, his masterpiece.
Yeah.
A breathtaking theological and spiritual vision.
That language speaks volumes about its impact. But the notes also add a crucial clarification.
Yeah.
Despite its grand theological scope, the content and context of Romans are fundamentally those of a missionary epistle.
So understanding the why he wrote it to people he didn't know in a city he hadn't visited is key here. It connects directly to his mission.
Absolutely. The notes underscore that the purpose was tied directly to his vision, to make disciples of all ethne, all the nations, all the peoples, even reaching what he saw as the ends of the earth, specifically naming Spain.
So he wrote Romans because he needed the involvement and partnership of the established believers in Rome to fuel that westward push.
Exactly. He was essentially laying out his theological foundation and future plans to enlist their support for the next great phase of his ministry.
It's quite something to think about that vision driving him, especially when the notes point out that he couldn't possibly have imagined it would be 3 full years before he actually set foot in Rome.
That timeline really highlights the unpredictability, doesn't it? And the delays inherent in ministry and travel in that era.
And a major detour occurred precisely because his initial plan to get to Jerusalem after Corinth was disrupted.
Right. There was a plot against his life if he sailed directly from Corinth to Syria. Is that what the notes say?
Yeah, a plot to take his life at sea forced him to completely change plans.
So instead of taking the quick boat east, he had to make the long and arduous journey back west, walking all the way back to Macedonia.
A significant and unexpected change of plans, yeah. From Macedonia, he and his companions eventually took a boat, making several important stops along their way back towards Jerusalem.
Yes, pausing to connect with believers in Troas, and, notably, gathering the elders from Ephesus and Miletus.
Right, for that deeply emotional farewell, according to the accounts in Acts.
Yeah, this was all part of his winding route back towards Jerusalem.
And the notes tell us that within days of his arrival in Jerusalem, the city erupted into uproar around him, just like Ephesus almost.
Leading to his swift arrest. He had to be whisked away under the cover of night for protection.
And the notes emphasize the scale of the Roman response. A large guard unit consisting of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen.
Wow, that's a serious escort.
That contingent alone tells you just how volatile the situation was. They weren't messing around.
Which then brings us to his extended imprisonment in Caesarea. The notes state he spent the next 2 years under arrest in Herod's palace there.
That period is dated specifically as 57 to 58 AD. Following that, around 59 AD, he had his significant trials before figures like Festus and Agrippa.
And after enduring those 2 years under arrest and the trials, the long-planned voyage to Rome finally began. But not as a free man.
No. As a prisoner heading for trial before Caesar, the notes mention several more months spent at sea, stretching from late 59 into 60 AD.
And it was far from a smooth journey, was it? I remember reading about this.
Hardly. The route described includes passing Cyprus, heading towards the coast of Pamphylia, getting caught in a massive hurricane off Crete.
Oh boy.
And eventually being driven completely off course, resulting in a shipwreck on the island of Malta. Just one thing after another.
After all that ordeal, they finally reached Rome.
They eventually arrive, making their way into the massive city in the spring of 60 AD.
What was Rome like at that moment, according to the notes? What kind of city was he entering?
Well, the description contrasts the city's sheer scale, 2 million inhabitants, huge, with the stark realities of life there. While there were certainly privileged homes, the vast majority lived in miserable, overcrowded tenement buildings, the insulae.
Right, and the emperor at the time was Nero.
Yep, Nero, who ruled from 54 to 68 AD, described in the notes quite plainly as a nasty character, whose extravagance was beginning to severely strain the empire's finances. Not a good time to be falling out of favor.
A really challenging backdrop for his arrival. And interestingly, the notes don't immediately tell us exactly what reception he found upon getting there.
That's right. The source leaves that initial period a bit mysterious. We don't know the details of those first few days.
But despite the circumstances of his arrival as a prisoner, he was essentially under house arrest, shackled to a Roman guard. He was permitted to rent a house. That seems a bit surprising.
It does. A bit of leniency, perhaps. And despite the limitations, he didn't hesitate to begin his ministry there.
Not at all. The notes highlight his immediate action, calling together the leaders of the local Jewish community to visit him only 3 days after he arrived. He wasted no time.
He ended up spending the next 2 years under guard in that rented house. That timeline is given as 60 to 62 AD.
What's truly fascinating here is how he leveraged the situation. The source emphasizes that he used this time of apparent confinement to explain the kingdom of God and the message of the Lord Jesus Christ to everyone who came to visit him during those 2 years. All comers welcome.
This really raises an important question that the source poses, doesn't it? Was this rented house effectively the new mission hub?
Exactly. The question is whether, even under house arrest, he was able to establish a center in Rome from which teams might have been equipped and sent out.
Kind of like an echo of the model he used in Ephesus.
Yeah, perhaps reaching out across the vast city and even towards the far western edges of the empire he longed to reach, maybe even Spain from there.
It's certainly possible. And this period of house arrest in Rome was incredibly significant, not just for ministry activity, but for his written legacy, too.
Yes, it was during this time that he wrote what are known as his prison epistles, Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon, and Philippians.
Amazing. Letters written from under guard, yet filled with such profound teaching and encouragement. Philippians especially, the letter of joy.
Incredible. And the notes indicate that he was acquitted around 62 AD, after those initial 2 years under arrest.
Which opens up a period where, again, the notes pose questions about his activities. Things get a bit hazy.
So after his acquittal in 62, leading into 63 AD, and possibly beyond, the sources aren't entirely clear on his exact movements. We lose the detailed tracking.
That's right. The notes specifically ask, did he manage to revisit regions like Macedonia and Asia Minor? Did he finally get to spend a winter in Western Greece?
And the big one, linking back to his earlier vision, did he actually make it to Spain? The source doesn't give a definitive answer.
No, it leaves it as a question, a possibility based on his stated intentions in Romans.
And if he did travel and later return to Rome during these years, say around 63, 64 AD, it was a particularly dangerous time.
Absolutely. The notes stress that if he returned to Rome then, he would have found himself in severe peril along with all followers of Jesus.
Things were escalating under Nero.
Definitely. These were increasingly dangerous days, and the source states that it's probable that both Paul and Peter were executed in Rome during this horrific period, likely around 64 AD.
And that date, 64 AD, is notorious in Roman history because of a specific catastrophic event.
The Great Fire of Rome. Yeah.
Yeah.
The notes provide crucial context here. Nero had apparently wanted to clear a large section of the city.
Right, for his own grand building projects, his golden house.
Exactly. But the Senate opposed the plan.
Then, on July 18th, 64 AD, the fire broke out, starting in shops near the Circus Maximus.
The source describes it as raging for 9 days, just devastating 2/3 of the city. It's a dramatic, terrible image.
Yeah.
Nero supposedly watching from a distance, while gangs reportedly blocked citizens trying to fight the flames, whether that's true or rumor.
Right, but suspicion fell on him. And with widespread suspicion that Nero himself was somehow responsible for the fire.
He desperately needed someone else to blame, a scapegoat, and the source clearly states that he fixed that blame squarely on the Christians.
Who were already a somewhat misunderstood and distrusted group.
Exactly, leading to horrifying, systematic, and indiscriminate persecution. Just brutal.
Yes, the notes detail the truly awful methods. Christians were crucified, fed to lions in the arena.
And most gruesomely burned alive as human torches to light Nero's garden parties at night. Just unimaginable terror for believers in Rome.
It's believed that it was during this heightened period of danger and persecution, perhaps after potential further travels, that Paul was imprisoned in Rome for a final time.
Yes, the source material suggests this was his final arrest, possibly caught up in that Neronian persecution after the fire.
And it's from this final imprisonment, likely just before or during the intense persecution sparked by the fire, that he's believed to have written the 3 pastoral epistles.
Yes, the letters we know as 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus, offering final instructions and encouragement to his protégés.
The notes also mention that the letter to the Hebrews is believed to have been written around this same difficult time, though its authorship is debated.
Right, but contextually, it fits that period of intense pressure on Jewish Christians.
Wow. When you trace that whole trajectory from leaving Ephesus with these grand plans through the detours, the arrests, the shipwrecks, the house arrest, and finally to likely a final imprisonment and death in Nero's Rome, it's an almost unbelievable sequence of events.
It truly is astonishing, the sheer volume of ministry and writing Paul accomplished amidst constant plots, physical dangers, shipwrecks, imprisonments, and terrifying state-sponsored persecution is just remarkable.
But through all that chaos and hardship, the notes consistently point back to that single driving force, his vision.
Yeah, his vision to reach the ends of the earth with the gospel.
That vision seems to be the constant anchor, the internal compass that kept him going through every external storm imaginable.
It really does seem that way.
And here's where it gets really interesting, thinking about application. How do these challenging circumstances, this backdrop of Nero's increasingly tyrannical rule and the horrific aftermath of the Great Fire, shape how we read and understand the words of these letters?
Yeah, think about Romans, talking about God's sovereign faithfulness written while dreaming of Spain. Or Philippians, a letter brimming with joy written from prison chains.
Or the practical, steadfast instruction in Timothy, written when everything around him was literally collapsing into fear and violence.
The context isn't just historical detail. It adds immense weight, urgency, and depth to his words. These weren't abstract theological treatises written in a quiet study.
Not at all.
They were truths forged in the fire of real-world challenges, danger, and unrelenting persecution.
So what does all of this mean for you as you reflect on this deep dive into Paul's later years? The notes themselves prompt us with some powerful application questions.
Questions like, what was the true underlying force driving the Apostle Paul through all of this? I mean, what kind of vision could possibly fuel that level of unwavering commitment in the face of such relentless opposition?
And how does that expansive, persistent vision, perhaps best captured in Romans 15.23, where he speaks of having no longer any place left to work in those eastern regions, and his intense longing to go to Spain. How does that resonate or maybe challenge you today?
Yeah, it's a big question. Ultimately, the story invites us to consider, maybe on a personal level, what is it that allows unwavering commitment to a vision to sustain someone?
Right, sustain them through overwhelming external chaos and profound personal hardship, as it so clearly seems to have done for Paul.
Definitely something to mull over as you go about your day. Until our next deep dive.